All right, I am Kent Lindstrom. I am a co-founder and general partner of 8-Bit Capital, and I have this podcast, and you are listening to it, and I so appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening. Today on the podcast, I want you to just think about this for a second. The two guys who were executives at Amazon, Bill Carr and Colin Breyer, basically the whole way, from the late 90s till recently, part of the senior management team. Bill Carr launched and managed the digital thing, the music, the video, the studios, a lot of which I'm sure we all watch. And Colin, executive the whole way as well. He was one of Jeff Bezos' chiefs of staff, Lieutenant Jeff Bezos. One of the other chiefs of staff is about to become the CEO of that company. And I just want you to think for a second. They've written a book that tells the secrets, the management secrets, called Working Backwards, the management secrets of Amazon. I want you to think about all the business books, if you're the type who reads business books, all the business books you've ever read, the Kanban, the Six Sigma, etc. Every one of the companies that those books were based on, stacked up their market cap, added together, probably don't add up to half of the value that Amazon has created. And so the case could be made that this book, Working Backwards, that these two guys have written, that tells the secrets of Amazon's management, leadership, is literally the most important business book of all time. Now, a little bit of hyperbole, it's a podcast. But if you think about it, here they are, Bill Carr, Colin Breyer, authors of the book that tells the secrets, the insights, the stories, and the secrets from inside Amazon, Working Backwards. Welcome back. All right, welcome back. This is the Something About Your podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guests today are Bill Carr and Colin Breyer. How are you guys doing?
Great. How are you, Kent?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much. So Bill and Colin have written a book called Working Backwards. And the reason they've written a book is because they were key executives at Amazon through almost all of its growth phases. Bill, a long career, I'm not going to be able to summarize in a minute, but Bill, among other things, launched global, I guess it's called Global Digital. This includes Amazon Music, Prime Video, and Amazon Studios. Colin was a leader for at least 12 years, but he famously was one of Jeff Bezos' chiefs of staff, the key lieutenant. I think one of the other chiefs of staff is about to become the CEO of Amazon. So I want to start. How did you guys, you come to Amazon in the late 90s, and to kind of paint a picture for people, this wasn't, people were trying to be doctors and lawyers and maybe investment bankers. Like, people weren't really thinking that joining an internet company, now everyone looks back and says, geez, I wish I worked at Microsoft, Google, or Amazon. But how did you come to make this decision and find Amazon and say, hey, this is how I'm going to start my career?
So I had always been in technology. I'd worked for Oracle right out of college for about 5 years, and then started a consulting firm with a couple other people this was in 1996, to try to help companies take all of their data and processes and expose them via the web, which is what really, quite honestly, no one knew how to do at that point. So we were helping companies through that journey. And we worked with a lot of companies up in the Northwest, Microsoft, Starbucks, Boeing, but we also were working with this small internet company called Amazon.com. And we just realized there was something very special going on. And, I remember the first time I actually saw the Amazon website thinking, oh, these guys get it. And you could just see the power of the internet come through. And then once we started working with the company, behind the scenes, saw how that was happening. It was just something really, I knew it was something special, and I knew it was something that we had to be a part of. And so, 97 and then early 98 is when we made the transition over to Amazon.
And what did you see when you saw that website? I mean, what was the magic thing that kind of struck you at that time?
One of the features was the collaborative filtering, and that feature's no longer there, but just looking at your your purchase history, and you could also give the hints about, well, what books am I interested in, and then it would parrot back here's some other books. So just the power of taking a huge catalog of items and being able to make very specific recommendations to you. That was one of the reasons why Amazon started off in books, because it was, a big catalog. But so that was one feature that jumped out. And then you could there's a book on pretty much everything, and you could have it in a few days. And so that was, most of the world's knowledge is encoded in books. So you had ready access to all of the world's knowledge, and you can get it on your doorstep in a few days. So those were two of the things that impressed me about it.
It's kind of amazing. People forget how big a deal that was. I forget how Amazon did it. I think maybe they ran on top of the Bowker catalog or something. But if you went to a bookstore, like the biggest bookstore, Barnes and Noble Superstore in New York, I think had maybe 200,000 titles or 150,000. I think Amazon had like 4 million. It was just some crazy multiple of what you could get at a regular bookstore at the time. And people now, order a spatula and it shows up 4 hours later. But I think people forget what a huge deal that was. The access to books that you had compared to the biggest store in the biggest city in the world.
It was a big deal. And for clarity, actually, the way Amazon achieved it was not initially with the Bowker catalog, was by partnering with Ingram and Baker and Taylor, who are the two, Ingram Book, the two largest book distributors. Basically, they served as wholesalers between publishers and retailers. And each one of these companies maintained an electronic database of all the different books that they were able to source from publishers. And the reason why Amazon worked was that, number one, Jeff simply paired this electronic database that these wholesalers had and then made it available and visible to customers. And so Amazon then acted as this aggregator intermediary to then give a customer-facing way that people could actually order things from Ingram and Baker and Taylor, because simply we'd get in the early days of Amazon, we didn't, the company didn't carry inventory. They didn't have a warehouse. They'd simply get an order for a book, place the order with Ingram Book or Baker and Taylor, get the book in to, Jeff's house initially,
right,
and then package it up and send it back out to customers. So it was basically marrying the internet with these databases and then picking the exact right category to begin with, where, yes, to your point, they were able to offer, many multiples, 100x, 10x greater selection than your average bookstore would. And so that was huge value. Jeff created enormous value through that marrying of those technologies.
So as you joined, what was the state of, were you in, was it Jeff's house and you were packing books, or were you a little later than that? Or
I joined in March of 1998, and Amazon had just reported its 97 results, which was its first year as a public company. It was $148 million that Amazon had done in revenue that year. There were about 100 people in the corporate group, give or take, and we were in a relatively small building, a 4-story building down by Pike Place Market in Seattle. It's a famous tourist area, and there were desks in the hallways, crammed in the offices, and we were just selling books at that time. And we had just opened the second fulfillment center, which was in Delaware, and the first one was just south of the office in Seattle. So there were about 600 total people in the company, and then 100 in the corporate area.
I mean, the company grew at a remarkable rate, if you think about this. So the Amazon.com opened in 1995. 2 years later, it was already a public company. So this is one of the big differences between today and then. Now, no one goes public after 2 years, right? They stay private for this long periods of time, right? And yes, Colin joined in 97. The company had already done $148 million in revenue just as a 2-year-old company. And I joined just a year later, 1999, but literally it was like joining a completely different company than Colin joined, because the company, 99, let's not forget, was the .com boom. So this was the peak of the early peak of Amazon stock price, peak of hiring. We were growing like crazy. And in that year, we opened up either 4 or 5 more fulfillment centers across the country, each one having several 100,000 square feet and automated sortation systems. And honestly, like we really didn't even have the management or staff to be able to properly run those fulfillment centers, which is why a few months after I joined, like many of my coworkers, I was then sent to Fernley, Nevada for 3 weeks to help pick, pack, and ship items to people because we literally couldn't hire enough people fast enough to do the work.
Wow.
And the reason we were, one of the reasons we were growing so fast, there was a mantra, was get big fast, because we realized you could be a steady, profitable, small e-commerce company, and you could be a steady, profitable, large e-commerce company. You didn't really want to be stuck in the middle, because all of the things that you would need to do to build at scale that make a difference, personalization, technology, logistics and fulfillment, all of the customer self-service features. To build those, you needed enough volume going through that platform to be able to make it worthwhile to develop some of those things. So it was different than a growth at all costs. We needed to have a large infrastructure, and people and customers were validating it. So we built that infrastructure and the technology a little bit before the customers came. But the get big fast was a very specific and deliberate mantra. And then once we had achieved some of that scale, as Bill mentioned, we were trying to figure out how to manage all of this infrastructure. And this is where some of the processes, the management science that Amazon started to focus on, is how do we manage this company now that it's going to continue to grow, but we need to manage it in a different way. So there was a shift, and about 2 or 3 years after we had joined, from get big fast to let's create a sustainable, profitable company.
And as you're working with Jeff Bezos early here, is it clear to you? Is he Jeff Bezos at this? Clearly has become one of the most successful and influential CEOs and creators of enterprise value of all time. Do you have a sense of this at this time when you're shipping books out the door as fast as you can?
Well, Jeff evolved like many of us. This was the biggest job of Jeff's life, and it was the biggest job for most of us because things were growing so fast. Nearly everyone at Amazon, except for a handful, would come in from outside companies. This was the biggest job of everyone's life. And when you encounter that situation, you're going to be overwhelmed at first and be, inadequate to do certain parts of it, but then you're going to grow and adapt. And what was clear, to me very early, is that Jeff was exceptional. Like every time I would be in a meeting with Jeff, or whether it was a small meeting or a big meeting, the words that would come out of his mouth, the thoughts, the concepts were like nothing I'd ever heard before. And the way he was able to think so big and so strategically, and have this, obsession with customers. It was so clear to me, even in 1999, how he was thinking about how do I make sure that this company is successful for decades to come, and how do I start putting in place the foundation. But to be clear, there were a lot of ways that Jeff was deeply flawed and incapable of being an effective CEO in those early days too. And I remember personally questioning, gosh, I wonder if this is really going to work out or not. Is this really is Jeff going to lead us to the promised land, or is he going to drive us all over a cliff? And it took me, I don't know what point it was 3 years or 4 years, but at a certain point, then once I saw him in action long enough and saw how he was steering the company, my opinion of that had changed forever.
Yeah. And was there, what pressure was he under? Because he famously, or you all famously, swapped profitability at certain times for scaling. What kind of pressure was he under to maybe not be CEO even? Let's bring in a pro from the outside now that this thing's, growing, or, let's bring someone in to cut costs and get this thing profitable. Did he always have the confidence and the power to kind of keep those forces at bay?
There was a period of time in the early 2000s where Amazon brought in, it was President or Chief Operating Officer, Joe Galli, who was there for about a year. And it didn't work out too well. And I think that Jeff, that at that point, Jeff was trying to figure out how much do I want to focus and stepping back and looking at strategic direction versus, building and operating the company. And that was a decision point at that for the board and also for Jeff. And a year later, Jeff said, "No, I'm going to take the reins and run this thing soup to nuts." And so there was a brief window of experimentation on whether Jeff is going to be the CEO moving forward, involved on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And at that point, how far does his vision extend? It seems like it extended, obviously, to, okay, I'm going to go from, books to garden tools, that it would end up at movie studios and, running many of the websites on the planet. That couldn't have been there in the early days.
No.
Well, if you look at, Jeff will admit it himself that even if you look at his initial business plan, the pro forma financial plan that he developed when he was, recruiting early investors, I don't remember the exact details, but I believe it was going to take him 5 years to get to $100 million in sales, and it was going to be books only. But he very early on was talking about Amazon as the place to find, discover, and buy anything you might want to purchase online. There was an inflection. What year did Jeff change his mind to start thinking how much Amazon would go beyond that? Maybe Colin can speak to that better than I can. I try not to speculate on what Jeff thought or didn't think, but what I can say for sure is that beginning in late 2003, 2004, he established two different teams. One focused on digital media that I ended up being one of the founding leaders on, and another one focused on Amazon Web Services that were clearly setting Amazon down a path to enter new business categories that people wouldn't have naturally thought that they would go enter.
Right.
And I would also just add, I think Bill was spot on with that, and that the vision was largely customer driven. And so if you want to focus on customers and have a large scale e-commerce business, and a lot of it's moving digital because we were moving physical goods around, DVDs, books, CDs, as well as electronics and other categories. But if we wanted to remain a big part of customers' lives, that was when you have to build up the digital organization. We did not know what it would look like at that point when we embarked on that journey, but you just have to peel back the layers and start discovering what is the customer experience necessary to be a big part in digital delivery of goods. We did the same thing, same journey with web services. So what Amazon did for these two initiatives, embarked on a journey not knowing where it would take them, but just really focused and obsessed over what is the customer experience we need to provide. In some cases, we had the capabilities to provide that. We needed to just course correct a bit. In other cases, we had to invent something completely new, or we had to do something that exercise muscles that we had never done before, like building devices. And so if you let the customers lead your journeys, it'll take you to unexpected places. But if you do follow that and stick to that principle, you stack the odds in your favor of making a meaningful difference in customers' lives.
Right. So the book that you guys have now written is called Working Backwards: Insights, Stories, and Secrets from Inside Amazon. So at some point, and working backwards, if I understand this correctly, is one of the ideas, and it has to do with the idea of, if you have a product idea, maybe tell me if I'm getting this wrong, write the press release first, where you say, look, there's this product and here's what it does and here's what it costs. And if people look at that press release and say, well, that's too expensive, or I don't really want that product, maybe you rethink things before you build it.
Yeah, so the working backwards process, it's different. Where it differs from how a lot of organizations make a decision, a go, no go decision, is a lot of companies use what's called the skills forward approach. What are we good at? What are the competitors doing? How and can we, what are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And then move into another, should we move into this area or do this initiative? Amazon, working backwards at its heart, is starting from the customer experience, making sure you've defined that well, And the press release and FAQ, those are the tools that Amazon uses for the working backwards process. So the key difference is that it starts from the customer perspective and then walks back from that. And you were right about once you write the press release, if you don't want to buy or use that service, you don't pass on to the next step. You have to write the press release, and again, just to make sure that this is something you as a customer would be excited to buy or use.
And how do these ideas emerge? There's, I think it's 14 leadership principles. Is that right? And kind of 4 areas of customer obsession, long-term thinking, eagerness to invent, and operational excellence. Is that kind of the parameters?
Well, there are 14 leadership principles, and then there are sort of a distillation of those 4. If you have to sort of break down Amazon and just break it to say, what is Amazon, and distill it to 4 things. Those 4 things are customer obsession rather than competitor focus, long-term thinking, much longer term than most other companies have, a willingness to invent and the corresponding willingness to fail that comes with invention, and then finally, professional pride and operational excellence. The leadership principles are a set of detailed principles that define what does a role model leader at Amazon look like. And by the way, anyone is a leader. It doesn't matter whether you are an individual contributor that just came out of college or business school, or whether you're one of the most senior executives. And these principles define the way that leaders at Amazon look at problems, the lens through which they look at problems to make decisions, and how they actually do work. And these, what really sets these a couple of things set these principles apart. First of all, it's a long list, and the time and care that Jeff and his senior leadership team put into coming up with this list and sweating every word that describes each one of these principles is extraordinary. Literally, Jeff spent months working on this. And the second part is that the way these leadership principles are intentionally knit into specific mechanisms and processes that are designed to reinforce them and create these processes that mean that when you do a certain type of work, they force you or cause you to use and refer to one or more of the leadership principles themselves. And so this is how Amazon has made their principles be more than posters on the wall, because nearly all companies have some set of values or principles, but often they're a poster on the wall, but they don't really mean anything. They don't define how the company does work, how the company thinks about who to hire, who to promote, how to coach and develop people. But that's how these principles work at Amazon.
And why did these ideas, as I think about this, you guys have, written a book about the management ideas behind the most valuable company in the world, one of the most valuable companies in the world. Why not? Why didn't Jeff just grab a bunch of ideas off? I mean, there's lots of management ideas, Six Sigma, there's a bunch of stuff out there. What was it that happened that instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to get an MBA from Harvard or have McKinsey come and Boston Consulting Group draw a grid, that it was a new set of principles?
Some of the principles and processes were inspired, or we learned from other organizations. Toyota, Motorola, for instance, with their Six Sigma and total quality management, we were able to bring some folks in and learn about that. But how these principles evolved, the way we describe them now, they didn't start out. Most of them did not start out that way. For instance, there were 10 leadership principles when they first were published in 2005. They're 14 now. So there was, a slow evolution, in terms of the working backwards process that with using the press release and FAQ. It took us a while to figure out, is this the right way to vet ideas and bring them to market? So it was a combination of studying what the current field of management science is, but then also relying on those four core cultural pillars of customer obsession, long-term thinking, invention, and pride and operational excellence to develop the set of principles that would make Amazon work. So, they weren't developed in a vacuum, but one thing Jeff would not compromise on were those four cultural pillars. And so some of the management science out there, for instance, how you measure things, from the very first shareholder letter in 1997, and Jeff publishes that with each subsequent shareholder letter. He says, we're going to make decisions long-term. We will trade off short-term when forced, if forced to, we will trade off short-term cash for the long-term, benefit of the customers.
And are these, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just add that to reinforce what Colin said, we actually in every case did start with one of the industry standard processes. Like a good example is that as we grew as a company, we needed to figure out how to enact better cross-company planning. And our then CFO, Warren Jensen, who had been at GE, helped implement the GE process for doing that. But we concluded very quickly that this process, frankly, was a huge waste of time. And basically, we spent more time in meetings coordinating and discussing work rather than doing work and building for customers. Another good example is that when my manager, Steve Kessel, and I started to lead the ideation process with Jeff Bezos for what should we plan and build in digital media and devices, we used the same toolkit that we were taught when we got our MBAs, and we brought those into meetings. And Jeff rejected that toolkit very quickly because it was very much starting with market data, projections of market share, projections of financials, but absolutely did not consider at all what kind of customer experience we would build or how we would create value for customers. And so I think one of the things we're trying to communicate in our book, Working Backwards, is that most people know about Jeff being remarkable for the products that he's innovated, but the secret that we are revealing to the world here is that Jeff was equally, if not more, innovative with respect to rethinking or not accepting at face value the accepted management science and practices of the day. We would try them, but if they didn't fit the rubric and the construct that Jeff had in his mind about customer obsession and long-term thinking and invention and operational excellence, then we rejected them and tried, and we went on our own journey to create and invent new processes. And this book describes that evolution and describes what were the processes that ultimately stuck and hardened at the company that are unique and distinctive to Amazon.
And we think that information ultimately is more useful to people. And it, by the way, works for organizations large and small. A lot of these processes started off in groups of 5 people or less, and then we scaled them so they have a nice fractal quality. So these aren't things that you need to be a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation to adopt. You can adopt them in small organizations as well. And it's been tried and tested across a number of different industries. AWS, primarily B2B, works in a B2C environment, pure digital delivery of goods, a heavy lifting logistics environment. It's pretty universal and tried and true.
And I've found already, being here in Silicon Valley and the very short life that your book has been in the world, a lot of entrepreneurs, and these are people with maybe a couple $1 million in the bank and maybe 10 employees, are pretty keen to understand these ideas. Is there anything in particular about a small organization that you would say, boy, you really got to get this one right early? It was key that Amazon got this one right early.
Yeah, it's your leadership principles, your culture. So if you think about, so what every startup CEO goes through is a period of time when everyone in the company can fit into one meeting, one stand-up, one room, and that CEO can meet with, interact with, peer over the shoulder of everyone who works for him or her. And they can be involved in every hiring meeting, every hiring decision. But if that CEO and that company find product market fit and start to grow, that will not remain the case. And so as soon as you're growing beyond 100 people and maybe trying to double year over year or triple year over year, and you have new managers hiring, new executives hiring new managers, hiring new people, if you don't have an intentional process for what leadership and what are the right principles in your company, you will lose your grip on your culture. It will evolve and morph into something else based on the individual decisions of those individuals who've come from other companies, and will imprint their experience and their perspective on who I should hire, and bring those people into the company, and you will lose control over your culture. And there's a simple way to maintain control of that culture, which is to A, establish very clear leadership principles for your company, and B, knit them into a process, mimicking the Amazon bar raiser process that then allows you to forces an intentional, objective interview process to hire people who will actually map to those leadership principles and thrive in your company and reinforce those principles.
And so with companies we've worked with, it was especially say, it's not like the company used to be, it can be traced to one of those two things that Bill mentioned, either not a solid definition of the leadership principles or a deliberate hiring process to vet people who reinforce those principles. And when you bring people on board, they actually are accretive to the company culture versus changing it. And if you grow from 5 people to 20 people without a deliberate hiring process and knowing what you're looking for, that's how you lose control of what is this company all about, and what defines us as an organization, and how are we going to achieve our mission.
And so as you wrote this book and as you think about it now, I'm still struck by this idea that, how many hundreds of books have been written about Six Sigma or, whatever theories have been written about. With all due respect to those companies, Amazon's a lot more valuable than GE or any Japanese auto company. As this book comes into the world and people start learning and applying, what are your hopes for it? And what were you thinking when you guys don't need to write a book, but you obviously spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into it?
Yeah, what we were thinking was these management practices, this management science that Amazon has developed is remarkable, and that the way we progress as a society is to stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about literature, art, the sciences, political science. The framers of our Constitution read the work of others to help decide, how should we create form a more effective government. And so we really think that Amazon has devised one of the most, if not the most, one of the most effective ways to manage a company, and that it works at any level. And we'd like to pass that on to the next generation of business leaders to advance the topic of management science and help others.
Great. So before I leave everybody to run out and buy what's really a remarkable, it's a remarkable book working backwards, but it's a remarkable story you guys have been part of. Bill, as you were running Prime Video at Amazon Studios, did you have any crazy sort of out-of-body moments where you found yourself in Hollywood or at the Oscars or meeting somebody you never imagined you might meet?
I had one out-of-body moment where I was sitting, I was at an event and happened to be seated outside at a table relaxing with George R.R. Martin and Neil Stephenson. Wow. Just sort of, chatting along, where George R.R. Martin recounted a story of a trip to London where he sought to buy a sword cane. And I didn't realize that a sword cane was the thing, but then he described what it was and the different stores. And so I noticed on my next trip to London, as I passed by, like some stores actually mentioning this sort of thing. Actually, it's a sword that is inside a cane. You pull the sword out. Anyway, that was a relatively surreal moment, but there were many others like that.
Wow. And Colin, as you were lieutenant for Jeff Bezos, were there any moments or what, in that role, as I understand it, you sort of travel with Jeff, you or there when he's thinking things through. Were there any kind of particular takeaways or kind of personal things that sort of left you with?
Well, I had a lot of those moments almost on a daily or weekly basis working with Jeff. He does lead a different life than most of us, and but the thing that really struck me was just the joy that Jeff gets out of building value for customers. He's not doing it for his legacy. He wasn't doing it because other people thought he should be doing it. He had a very clear vision on building Earthsmith's customer-centric company and would go wherever that took him. And as Bill mentioned earlier, it was extremely rare that I would go into a meeting with Jeff and not walk out of that meeting learning something new that I didn't know, and that would help me and for the rest of my career, which is one of the reasons why Bill and I are writing this book is really to take some of these lessons. We realized that we were very fortunate to have been at a place at Amazon in the right time when all these things were unfolding, and we just thought it was not only a fun and interesting story for people to read about, but something that can really help them in their lives and their organizations moving forward.
Well, as we wrap up here, your book Working Backwards comes out as Jeff Bezos exits the stage, but turns over the day-to-day to somebody else. What are your thoughts? I mean, is it the right time? What are your reflections on that moment?
In terms of timing, it's hard to predict when this was going to happen. It happened the week before our book launch, which I think was somewhat helpful. But kidding aside, I think in terms of moving forward, so Andy Jassy, he is more than capable to take over the realms. He's deeply steeped in the Amazon culture, the way Amazon works. He also invented cloud computing, he and the team. So he's able to work with small teams and build large businesses very quickly. So he's got, he has the knowledge and experience to step into that role. Some of the changes that we'll see, Amazon is at the size where those are going to take, multiple number of years in order to really show. But this invention machine that Amazon built with Jeff is humming along at a pretty good clip right now. And Andy and the rest of the team are great people to take over running and continue to refine and improve this machine.
Great. Well, the book is Working Backwards. Obviously, you want people to go get that book, Working Backwards, Insights, Stories, and Secrets from Inside Amazon. Can people follow you on Twitter, or is that how would people, follow your thoughts directly, or is it mostly through the book?
Well, they can visit our website, which is www.workingbackwards.com. And we are pretty regular contributors on LinkedIn as well. Great.
All right, Bill Carr and Colin Breyer, thank you guys so much. The book is Working Backwards. Probably want to buy it on Amazon. I got to ask you one more thing. Did you guys get hard copies of it, or did you just get it on Kindle?
Oh no, we have many hard copies of the book, and a lot of customers still prefer to buy hardcover and paperback books.
It's a rite of passage for authors getting the hard copy. I wasn't sure if you guys still did it, so that's great. All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.